So there is the XPath contains method, and it can be used when there is a pattern in attribute values. It can search anywhere in the attribute values of the element. It has the ability to find elements with partial text. Okay, or an and are the Boolean conditions, which can be used to identify elements with multiple attributes. So if you're using or, you can identify an element with any of the attributes which you have specified for the element. If you're using a and condition, then both the attribute values should be present for the element in order to identify them. Starts with, it's similar to contains, but it matches the starting text of the attribute. So it will start from the beginning of the attribute value and not anywhere on the attribute values. Okay, so that's the difference between contains and starts with. And then text, it matches the exact text to find the element. So you cannot use partial text in this text method. Then there is index method. Okay, so you can locate the elements using the index of that particular element on the page. So if there are multiple elements having the same attribute values, you can still identify them using index. Okay, so for example, if there are multiple buttons with the same name or ID, you can still identify them using the index. So these are the 5 methods which is present in XPath, using which you can identify different dynamic elements based on different scenarios. Okay, so let's see some examples how we can work with this. Okay, so let me continue here itself in this class. Okay, so for this, although these are not the exact scenarios, but still we can use them so that you get an idea of how you use these methods. Okay, but since these are simple elements, right, which has got straightforward IDs, you should not be using these XPath methods here. You can use it, but it's not necessary. You can use it for scenarios where you have these specific scenarios where you have got these elements which don't have any unique property or unique attribute. Okay, but for demo purpose, I will just use these elements, with the XPath methods. Okay, so for the XPath contains method. Okay, so let's see. So you need to build these XPaths on your own because you are using these different methods inside the XPath. Okay, so it's always better to kind of verify whether your XPath is working correctly and not directly use it in the script. First, verify it on the elements tab, right, using the developer tools. Say, for example, this username field. Okay, so if there are multiple fields on the page with the same attribute values for different text fields like this username password. Okay, and now we have got different ID and name for these two fields, but if there are no different ID or names present, then what you will do, right? So then you have to use these XPath methods. Okay, so for example, this ID value, right, that is user dash name, and the name also contains user dash name. Okay, so for this, if I want to identify this using the XPath contains method. Okay, so what I will do is I will use input. Okay, so this is the format how you write it. So after you write um, the tag, right, the element type, which is input, right? After this, you put a square bracket and then you specify which method you are using for XPath, right? So we are using the contains method, and then you give the bracket. Okay, inside this you have to specify which attribute you're trying to find, which is ID. Okay, and once you specify the ID, then you need to specify what partial text do you want to use for this contains method. So I want to use user. Okay, and then close the brackets. So as you can see, I am able to find this username field, even passing the partial text, which is user for the ID. The actual value is user dash name, but I'm just using a partial text, which I think will remain constant in this particular ID. So this is just an example. This name part could be changing in the application, okay, by the developers. So this is how you use the contains method. Yeah, so you can basically use this for any particular element, okay? So just use the attribute value, which you think would remain constant and would not change at any point of time, and just use it with the contains method. It will be able to find it uniquely, okay? Yeah, so as I said, it's always better to verify it here before you use it in your script. Okay, always verify your XPath here on the developer tools. Now, the remaining part would always remain same, right? So there is no change in the scripts. We are just using a different locator using the XPath methods. Okay, so here we are going into this page, right? So after that, we'll use the driver.find element y.xpath, and we'll use that particular XPath expression, and then just perform whatever we want to do here, right? Like we want to send keys, we want to pass the username here. Okay, now let's look at the other method. So now, if I don't want to use the contains method and I want to use the starts with method, right? So the format will always remain same. Instead of looking on the complete for the complete values of the attribute, right? It will search from the beginning of the attribute value. Okay, so if I specify user, it will start from the beginning and it will search whether the user is present in this particular attribute value. Okay, so that's the difference between starts with and contains. Okay, so this is useful when your constant value is at the beginning of the attribute value. Okay, and contains is useful when you can your that particular value which you have specified is present anywhere on the particular element. Okay, so instead of contains, we can also use starts with, right? So just need to replace contains with starts with. Okay, now so what was the other? Okay, so let's look at now the Boolean condition or an and, right? Now think you there are different elements where you have got this different ID and names, right? Or other attributes which are present for all the elements, but there is no unique attribute in those elements, right? At that time, instead of using just a single condition, right, or a single attribute, you can use multiple attributes. So what I mean is you can specify here at ID equals to username, okay, and here you can use and name or at name equals to user name. Okay, as you can see, it is uniquely able to identify this. We have used two attributes here, at ID and at name. Now this is useful when you don't have a single, you cannot identify a particular element using a single attribute and you want to use multiple attributes. Okay, so that time you can use this AND condition or AND method of the XPath. Here you can use it in a similar way here. Right, and similarly you can use the AND condition also. Okay, so this is how you use OR and AND methods of XPath for multiple attributes. Now, so let's look at, I think we already looked at the text method. Okay, so that was get text, right? So let's another example. Okay, so let me log in here. Now, if you want to find a particular element using just the text, right? So this text method will directly match the text present in the element. Okay, so if you are confident that some element has got no other attribute values, unique attribute values, but it can be identified by its text, which is unique across all the elements. Okay, at that in that type of conditions, you can use the text method. So for example, if I want to identify this particular element, right? Sauce labs backpack. So here you can see it has got just the class and the text. There is no other attribute which I can use here, right? So in these kind of cases, you can go ahead by using the text method. Okay, so let's see, let me copy this text. Then I can use dev. Okay, right? So as you can see, it is uniquely able to identify this particular element, one of one. So I have just used the element type, which is div. After that, I'm using the text method equals to the value. Okay. So this is how you use the text method, and you can easily identify any particular element on the page using this XPath text method. Okay, I'm just showing you how to use them. So by.xpath. Okay, and then just perform any particular operation like is displayed. Right. So this text method, we generally use it for verification. I don't think we'll be using it for identifying a particular element, but generally when we are trying to validate a particular text present on the element, we can, or whether that element is present, right? So that time we can use the text method of the XPath. Okay. Now, the last method, which is called the index method. Okay. Now let's see if we can find some example here. Okay, if you look at this page, this add to cart button, right? there are multiple add to cart buttons in this page. Okay, and you cannot use any text method, right? Because the text is same across all the elements. Then probably the name, the ID may also be same for all of these elements, right? Because it's a single button which is being used for all the different elements, and you can expect that these elements could be same across the page. In these kind of scenarios, you can use the index method, so that you can tell the driver which actual button you are trying to use, right? Once you identify this element, which button you are trying to click on. Okay, so let's look here. This has got ID. It has also got a text which you can use, but then there would be multiple buttons with the same text. Okay, so let's see if the ID works here. So button. Okay, so seems it has got different ID for different buttons. Yeah, so they have changed the IDs everywhere, right? So this I mean, this kind of scenario is not specific for us. So let's try and use the text here so that we get multiple buttons with the same identifier or element locator. Okay, so if I use text here, right now see, uh, there are one of six, right? Which means there are six elements with the same XPath expression, right? So I've used the text and it is showing me that there are six elements with the same element locator or XPath expression. So these type of scenarios, if you want to just use a single element out of all those six elements present on the page, right? In these type of scenarios, you can use the index. And how do you specify the index? You need to cover your XPath expression with round brackets, right? And then in square brackets, you need to specify the index. Okay, so if you want to use the first index, specify 1. If you want to use the second index, specify 2, right? So like this, you can access any particular element uniquely using the index. So here you can say driver dot find element by dot XPath dot click. So this is how you use the index. Now, if you want to also click on all the buttons, right? You can easily use a for loop, right? Um, get the number of elements, then iterate through each element and kind of parameterize this. Okay, so yeah, you will not be able to parameterize this because this is kind of value which will be passing inside the XPath, right? So you need to go one by one if you want to identify that particular element. Obviously, if you want to click on all the elements, you can directly use the find elements method, which will return you a list of all the buttons and then iterate through each element and click on all the buttons one by one, right? So for that purpose, you don't need this XPath expression. But if you want to uniquely identify a particular element which is not unique based on its attribute values, then go ahead with this index. Okay. Okay, so this is index text contains starts with and the logical operations. So did I miss anything? No. Okay. So these are all the XPath methods. Now, apart from these 5 methods which are present in XPath for you to identify dynamic elements, there are also something called XPath Axes, right? So these are sometimes called axis methods. Sometimes they are called axes. Both are the same thing. Okay. Now, these methods are actually used to identify elements based on some relationship with other elements, right? So if you're not directly able to identify a particular element, you can use the surrounding elements based on some relationship. You can identify the other element. Okay, so let's look at what are these access methods which are present in XPath. Okay, so there is this following method, and it selects everything in your HTML DOM tree after the closing tag of the current node, right? So if you use this following method, it will basically select everything after whatever you have specified for your current element, right? So you are able to identify a particular element on the HTML DOM, and after that, whatever elements are present, and you have to specify a element type, right? So once you specify that, it will select all the elements after that particular um, element which you have specified. So that's what following means. Okay, so we'll see with an example how it looks like. But let's first look at all the different access methods. So there is the ancestor, as the name suggests, it selects all the ancestors of your current node. Okay, so it may be a parent of the current node, or it may be a grandparent of the current node. It will select all the ancestors. Similarly, there is the child method, which will select all the children of your current node. Okay. Then there is preceding, which means it will select all nodes that appear before the current node. It is something similar to ancestor, but in ancestor, it will only select the parent or grandparent, or which is an ancestor, but preceding it will select all the nodes that appear before the current node. There is following sibling. It will select all the siblings after the current node. Sibling means the elements which are at the same level. Okay, so we'll see what it means to be at the same level, which means um, it lies on the same branch of the HTML document tree. Okay, so it will select all the siblings if you use the following sibling method. Then there is parent. It will only select the parent of the current node. Okay, not the other ancestors. It will only select the parent. Descendant, or it will select all the descendants, right? So similar to ancestor, where you can select all the ancestors, here it will select all the descendants, which is children or grandchildren of the current node, right? So these are basically all the different methods, access methods, which are present in XPath. Okay, and as I said, these are basically based on the relationship of one element with the other elements, through which you can identify elements which don't have any particular attribute or unique attributes. If you are able to identify an element which is present near to that particular element, right? Then you can use one element to identify the other elements based on some relationship, right? It may be some parent relationship or child relationship or sibling, right? So something similar to that. Now, how do we use these access methods, right? Let me create another method here. Okay, so let's look at this particular example. Or let's use the login page. That would be easier to understand, right? So this is the login button. Okay. And if I go up in the HTML DOM tree, you can see we have the password in which are div elements, right? And we have got the username and password which are under a different parent. Okay. So what I mean by parent is if you see this particular username field, right? And it has got this input tag. Okay. The div class form underscore group, right? This forms the parent of our username field because you can see it is contained inside this div class. Similarly, a password has got its own parent. Then that is grandparent, which is again the form, right? And similarly, there are different ancestors. And if I take this login box as the class, right? These are all the children elements of this dev class login box. Okay, so this is how you form your parent-child relationship with all your elements on the page. Okay, so either they may be contained inside a parent or a parent may have different children elements. Okay, so when you are trying to use the access methods, you have to understand your elements, how they are formed inside your HTML tree. Based on that only you can use different access methods. Okay. So let's see how we can use them. Okay, so let's try to use this login box class, right, in our XPath, and then we'll try to use the child elements to see whether we are able to access all the child elements or not. So we'll say div, we'll say login box. Okay, so till here, it is a normal XPath expression where you specify the element type and then what attribute you want to use and the attribute value. Okay, so this is where we are trying to identify an element which is unique using the attribute value. Okay, but now we want to identify some other element based on a relationship with this particular element. Okay, which we are able to uniquely identify, but not the other elements on the page. And we want to use some access methods. Okay, so for that, we can use any particular element here, right? So let me see what we can use here. So if I say following, okay, so yeah, so we are going to use the following method, which is an access methods, right? And it can basically identify everything in the document after our current node. Okay, so we can use this following method like this, right? So once you identify your XPath expression, after that put double slash. Double slash means it can identify any particular element after this particular node, right? So you can then specify following and then double colons, right? So this is the format of how you use the XPath access methods. After that, you need to put a tag or element type which you want to basically find, right? So since I want to find the username field, okay, so I will use the input tag here, okay, and as you can see, there are two input tags, right? After um, after this particular node, okay. So if I want to just access one element out of the two, I can specify a index here, okay. Okay. So in input one, we had two elements at the same level, username and password, and that's why it was showing me two elements. But if I specify the second level, right, then it will just identify this login button. Okay, so here you can see using this login box, which is unique, right? And the following method, which is the access methods, I can identify this login button, even though I'm not using any attribute of the login button. Okay, so this is how you use the access methods. We copy this XPath. So everything is a XPath expression. There is no change in that. Okay, but how you build your XPath expression, that could have different methods, either these common methods or this access methods. So actually all the access methods will return multiple elements. So you need to, if you want to point to a single element, you have to use the index, right? Because most of them, if not all, say for example, if I use parent, right? And I just put some random div element, right? As you can see, the login box parent is this container, which has got a class form underscore column. So this is my parent element. Okay, and if I use child, so I have got three children here, three child elements, right? So 1, 2, and 3 with the div type. If you want to identify some other type, you have to specify that type here. Okay, so this is how you use the child element, or sorry, the child access method. Similarly, if I want to use what were the other methods? So we looked at parent, child. If you want to use the ancestor method, right? So it will select all the ancestors, as I said earlier, which means, as you can see, there are 9 ancestors for the current element or the current node. Okay, so all the ancestors would be selected, right? And then if I use descendant, right, so all the descendant elements would be selected, which are div element types. So do remember that. Okay, so this is how you use different access methods to select different elements. There is also following sibling. Let's see if we have got any. Okay, so as you can see, this is the following sibling because it is at the same level. Okay, and there are two siblings. One is this error container and one is this password. So similarly, you have to, I mean, try to use all the different access methods and try to find which is the best one in order to identify a particular element based on some relationship with the other element, which you are able to uniquely identify. So based on the scenario of your automation, you need to try to use all the different access methods. If you are not able to identify using normal attributes or the XPath methods for dynamic elements. So this could be your last option, right? In order to identify a particular element which is not unique across the page. Okay, so if there are no questions, let's see the wait methods now present in the Selenium WebDriver. Now, a wait method, as the name suggests, it would tell the WebDriver to wait for a specific amount of time. Okay, and there are different methods. This is particularly useful for synchronization between your WebDriver scripts and your web application. So it's not like always like your WebDriver script and application would be in sync, right? What I mean by sync is your WebDriver script may move forward, but your application may not be loading in that particular point of time. In these kind of scenarios, your script will fail because your script is at some other point and your application is at some other point, which means they are not in sync, right? So to make sure that both your application and WebDriver script remains in sync, Selenium WebDriver has provided you with different methods, right, which you can use in different scenarios. So there is implicit wait, okay, and WebDriver waits for a certain duration of time, which we specify in this particular method, right? It will wait for all the elements on the page to load in that particular point of time before it throws a particular exception. Okay, so that is implicit wait. It is useful when certain elements on the page are not available immediately and may need some time to load. Okay, in that case, you can use the implicit wait. Then there is explicit wait. WebDriver will wait for a specific amount of time, right? And it will also wait for a specific element on the page. And that is the difference between implicit and explicit. You are explicitly waiting for a particular element, but in implicit wait, you are waiting, it is a generic wait for all the elements on the page to load, right? But here we will specify a particular element for which we want to wait till it is loaded. Okay. And this is obviously useful when a particular element is taking more time compared to other elements on the page. Okay. So there you can use the explicit wait. Now, fluent wait is pretty similar to explicit wait. The only difference is here also we tell the WebDriver to wait for a condition, but here we can also specify the frequency with which we want to check the condition, right? So we can tell that it is basically a polling mechanism, right? So every 5 seconds, the WebDriver is going to check on the page whether that element is present or loaded, right? So that polling would continue every 5 seconds. So we can specify that frequency. We can also specify some, I mean, we can ignore exceptions inside this particular method. So fluent wait is, you can call it more kind of specific for your scenario, right? Where you don't want to put any static wait, but you want to do it in a dynamically. I mean, you can specify the frequency, so it is basically dynamically waiting for that particular element which you have specified on the WebDriver. Okay. So all these three wait methods are dynamic. It is not static. Okay. So that means even if you have specified 30 seconds for your wait, if the element is loaded in 5 seconds, the script will move forward. Okay, it will not wait for those 30 seconds since the element was already loaded. Okay, so these are pretty useful whenever you want to use any particular wait method. Then there is page load timeout. Okay, so this is the amount of time for a page load to complete before throwing an error. So if you are expecting a page to take some time to load, then you can use the page load timeout. Then there is set script timeout. These are specific for async scripts, like for example, JavaScript. Right? So if some web page has got a JavaScript which loads, and sometimes it may take more time than specified, right? In those kind of scenarios, you can specify the set script timeout, which will wait for that particular script to finish execution before it throws any error. Okay. These are the two types of timeouts. And then there are some static wait methods present in Selenium. Uh, these are not advisable to use, but if there is no other way to move forward in your application, then you can use the static wait methods. So this is the wait method, which causes the current thread to wait until you basically tell that thread that you can move forward, right? So until that, it will wait. So if you specify 30 seconds, it will statically wait for those 30 seconds. It is not dynamic. Okay, and why it is not advisable? Because if you continuously start using wait methods everywhere in your scripts, your script execution time will increase. And even though your elements are being loaded in less time, still your script is taking more time to execute. There is also a Java method, right? It is similar to this wait method. So internally, it is calling that particular Java thread dot wait, which is basically stopping the threads, Java threads, to uh, to wait until you tell them that the wait period is over and the script can move forward, right? So these are all the different wait methods in Selenium. Okay, so let's see how we can use different wait methods. Okay, so you can use the driver.manage, and there is a timeouts method, right? So under this, you will find most of the timeouts or wait methods, but not all. The explicit and fluent wait are different. Okay, they are not contained inside this timeouts class. So implicit wait, as I said, it waits for all the elements on the page, right? So whenever you are loading any particular page, you can use this implicit wait if you're not sure that it is loading all the elements in the specified amount of time, right? So you can specify your own time here. You can say 30, which means that's the value of the timeout. And then you can use the time unit. Okay, so this time unit, it has got different kind of you can say values, like you can specify days, hours, microseconds, milliseconds, minutes, nanoseconds, seconds, right? So there are different parameters for to this time unit. So I will specify milliseconds, which means want the I want WebDriver to wait for 30 milliseconds. The max is 30, but if it loads before this, it will still go ahead with the script. But if some elements are not loading, it will wait for 30 milliseconds before it throws any error, right? So this is how you use implicitly wait. Now, if I want to use explicit wait, right? So in this login method, if I know that or if I come across scenario like the username or the login button is taking long time to wait, okay, I mean long time to load on this particular page, so I can explicitly wait for this login button. Okay, so how you can do this is so here you need to use the WebDriver wait. Okay, so there is this class WebDriver wait. You need to specify the driver and then the value, which is timeout in seconds. Okay, so this is how you specify a WebDriver wait to create an object of the class, and then you can use that object for explicitly waiting for a particular element, right? So you have to use wait.until. Inside this, you have to specify expected condition, expected conditions. Okay, and in this expected conditions, there are all these predefined conditions which you can use, and there are number of conditions. Okay, you can use any of these. If you're working with alerts, you can use alert is present. If you want to wait for the title, you can use title, right? Attribute contains element selection, but I generally prefer to use, you can also use presence of element located, which means if the element is located, then only it will um, specify the condition. Okay. But as I said, I generally try to use element to be clickable, right? And this condition makes sure that that element is clickable before it moves forward, right? So it will wait for that particular element to become clickable. Even if it is present and not clickable, still it will fail. So I find this condition useful when I'm trying to wait for a specific element. Okay. Then you can use the normal locator in order to identify that particular element, right? And you can end the condition, or you can also perform any operations on the element. Okay, so this will wait for this particular condition to be satisfied, and the max timeout is 30 seconds. Okay, but before, as I said, it is a dynamic wait mechanism, so it will not always wait for 30 seconds. If this condition is satisfied before that, it will move forward in the script. Okay, now if I want to see fluent wait, right? So this is set wait. And this is fluent wait. Okay, so fluent wait, it's not pretty straightforward. So you need to use different classes and interfaces for this. Okay. So you need to create a fluent wait. You have to specify the WebDriver inside this. Okay, after this, you can, there are different, as I said, there are different parameters or conditions which you can use in fluent wait. Okay, so you can ignore exceptions. You can poll what kind of duration you want to do a polling, which means checking that particular condition. Okay, so you can say with timeout. Inside this, you have to specify the duration. So you have to specify duration dot of seconds. Okay, and here you can specify what is the duration you want to wait. After that, you can specify polling every, right? So here again, duration dot of. So if I want to poll every 5 seconds, right, for a particular condition, and then I can also ignore any specific exceptions which I want to ignore, right? So I can say no such or no such element exception, and you need to specify dot class. Okay. So these are all the conditions which I want to put on my wait, and at that time I can use the fluent wait. After this, if you want to return the web element, right? So you need to use the wait object which we have created, and then you have to use until, right? So Once you type this, it will automatically put this particular syntax, which is for this particular fluent wait. Okay, so we have to pass the WebDriver and the web element inside this new function. And then we need to also pass this at override. Okay. And a normal, this we need to override this, basically this apply method, which is specified inside this fluent wait. Okay, so instead of returning null, you can return driver dot find element by dot id, and then you can specify whatever you want to return here. Right, so this is how you write a fluent wait with some conditions, and then you are overriding that particular apply method which is present inside this fluent wait, and you are returning your element from here. But generally, most of the conditions you can use, most of the scenarios you can use explicit wait when you want to explicitly wait for a particular element. In certain scenarios only where you want to poll every few seconds and not continuously for 30 seconds, then you can use the fluent wait.